Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. It is Tuesday, July the 23rd. I'm Zach Ewing here with Koki Riley and Reed Darcy. We are coming to you at the end of the offseason. Let's say that. We're almost back in LSU sports season. Football camp, I don't think we have an exact date yet, but it's probably going to be next week.
August 1st.
Oh, we do have a date. August 1st, okay.
August 1st.
I was looking for it earlier. They don't publicize that very well, but August 1st and the season starts about a month after that, so we're ready to rock and roll. But we've got a few things to talk about today. We're going to kind of wrap up the SEC Media Days portion of the football program, kind of talk about what you guys think still is outstanding as far as this LSU football team and how good they're going to be and the questions they have to answer. Koki is our LSU baseball beat writer. He's also going to give us a reset of the LSU baseball roster for 2025 post-MLB draft, which was last week. And we got a few other fun things to talk about. So that's our show for today, and it'll be coming right at you after this break.
Football fans, with the Caesars Sportsbook app, you can be in the game all the time. Seeking instant action? Quick Picks offers you the most popular games and markets, already built for you and ready to bet. Experience the thrill when you stack your bets to create a super parlay. Build bets for your favorite teams and players across multiple games. This season, don't just watch the game. Download Caesars Sportsbook and experience the game like never before.
All right, so pretty good show for you today. We'll talk some football. We'll talk some baseball. Going to start with LSU headlines, as we always do. Before we get to you guys, I do want to remind everybody, subscribe to the LSU Sports on NOLA.com, or on the Advocate, YouTube page. We're at, I think, like 3,600 subscribers. See if we can get to like 4,000 by the time football season starts, and then we'll go from there. So if you like the show, hit the like button. Of course, also subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends about our LSU Sports Insider podcast, and really improves your experience. Go over to that YouTube page, leave a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel. So, guys, LSU Sports headlines. It's July. Not a lot of them. Two football ones to talk about. DJ Pickett, 5-star cornerback. I think highest rated player LSU's gotten a commitment from since Derek Stingley, if I'm correct about that.
At corner.
At corner. Okay, I'm sorry. And then another cornerback, kind of the other end of the news spectrum.
Yeah, so we can start with DJ Pickett. I think that would probably be the best place to start. Cornerback from Florida, 5-star. Depending where you look, either the best corner in the country or the second best corner in the country in his cycle of recruits. So it's a big deal because LSU hasn't done something like this in a while, right? They haven't signed a 5-star corner since Eli Ricks in 2020, and they haven't signed overall a highest, a cornerback this really highly rated since Derek Stingley in 2019. So it's sort of when Brian Kelly brings back Corey Raymond, the defensive backs coach, who really sort of was kind of one of the architects behind LSU's DBU identity, right? Bring him back in the offseason, and now you've got one of the top corners to commit in a long time. I think it's a pretty big deal, and it could go a far way in sort of building back that defensive identity that LSU's trying to create.
Yeah, I mean, after LSU lost Jabari Antoine and his commitment, he ended up actually committing to Miami after decommitting from LSU. I thought that was like a real red flag for them, given the fact that you had this kid. It was a top 4 prospect in the state, like a high 4-star recruit at a position of need, and you bring back Corey Raymond. The whole point of bringing back Corey Raymond was so you could get a guy like him, and then to lose his commitment was it seemed like a real red flag for them. But when you add in a DJ Pickett, that more than just makes up for the Antoine loss, and they could still change Antoine's mind. I mean, I believe he still has an official visit with LSU, and there's still a lot of time between now and November. So, I mean, we'll see. It's going to be how the defensive backs room in general evolves throughout the rest of this recruiting cycle, because I'm pretty sure Pickett's the only DB they have committed for next year. How that evolves over the fall is going to be very interesting to watch.
And again, a long way to go until signing day, right? A lot can happen between now and then, but the fact that LSU has a lot of these top players committed, this early at this time, it's a good sign, and fans should be
Three
excited.
5-star recruits. Obviously, Bryce Underwood is the number one player, the number one quarterback in the country. Harlem Berry, excuse me, 5-star running back, top running back in the nation.
St. Martin's, New Orleans.
Exactly. Barry's a Louisiana kid, top player in Louisiana as well. So in terms of like top tier talent, this is the best that they've accumulated since Brian Kelly's taken over as head coach. And it's really one of the better, like, in terms just in terms of the top talent, it's some of the best top talent they've ever had, maybe in program history, if we're being honest. Just like, they've never had the number one overall player who was also the number one overall quarterback before. Like, those sort of guys go to USC or go to Oklahoma. They follow Lincoln Riley around, or they go to Alabama.
Ohio State's gotten a few, yeah.
Or Ohio State's
Or
one of those
Clemson.
4-ish places, right? 4 or 5
Clemson.
places. And LSU, I mean, after having a guy like Jaden Daniels, and I don't want to get into the whole quarterback tangent, but the point is that they've accumulated quite a bit of 5-star talent, legitimate 5-star talent, and that's a good sign, obviously.
Yeah, LSU is one of those schools that they're always going to recruit well. There's a lot of talent in Louisiana. They're a name brand. They can dip into Texas. They can dip into the rest of the South quite easily. But what we hadn't seen in the Brian Kelly era was these sort of commitments that you guys are talking about, where they can get into that next echelon and compete with the Ohio States and the Georgias and the Alabamas, not just being the number 6 or 7 class in the country, but competing for those spots in the top 3. So as they look to do that, Reed, you mentioned one thing, like sometimes you got to re-recruit these guys. You would obviously rather be the ones with the commitment than the one trying to get them to switch their commitment, obviously. But you still have to hang on to them. Other than that, in this new age of recruiting, when signing days in December, a lot of stuff gets done in the summertime. What else should LSU be looking out for, or should fans be looking out for from LSU on the recruiting cycle for the rest of 2025?
The recruiting class is coming together. I think if you look at the number of percentage 4 and 5-star players that they have, they're right near the top of the country, right, top of the list. If you'll go to the recruiting sites and check it out. So the top end talent is there, the foundations are there. Now it just sort of comes to building out the rest of the class and making sure you're well stocked, making sure you have enough depth at every position. And in this day and age, you have to recruit all the way through, right? Players decommit, they change their mind all the time. That even leading up till signing day, and then once they get on campus, you still have to keep recruiting them because they could hit the portal as well. And we saw this with LSU. At one point in the offseason, they had the 5-star quarterback Bryce Underwood, they had the 5-star running back Harlem Berry, and then 5-star receiver named Decorrian Moore. But he decided to decommit not long after he committed to LSU, and now he's committed to Oregon. So again,
Texas? I thought it was Texas.
no, I think he went to Oregon. He's from Texas.
Okay, I got that. No, it was it was Oregon actually.
Yeah.
Now I think of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
so the recruiting is a fickle business. I just think it speaks volumes that Brian Kelly and LSU have secured the state in Louisiana, and they've gone outside to get players as well. Bryce Underwood is from Michigan. DJ Pickett is from Florida, right? So you're going out and you're getting some higher-rated players in addition to securing down the base of talent of what you have in Louisiana, and I think that's probably the recipe for success that Brian Kelly and LSU wants to do.
They weren't able to land more, but I think we should definitely mention they also had a commitment from Derek Meadows, who's like a high 4-star, top 50, top 60-ish player in the country. I think 24/7 Sports has him as a 5-star actually. Bishop Gorman, prep wideout, which is Las Vegas high school. So you add in a guy like that, sort of bolster the receiving core after you lose a guy like Moore in the commitment. So in his commitment. So I think in general they're going in the right direction. It hasn't been perfect. Losing the Antoine commitment wasn't great, since that's a position of need, especially. Losing the Decorrian Moore commitment wasn't great. I mean, he was the top receiver in the country, but you added Meadows, you added DJ Pickett, which was a surprise to some people. And you already have Underwood and you already have Barry, and you're really starting to build something there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it will continue, and success breeds success. You mentioned Jaden Daniels. Probably had a direct impact in Bryce Underwood saying, yeah, I could see myself at LSU winning a Heisman Trophy, right? Among guys currently on the roster as we get going for fall camp, Javian Toviano, arrested, turned himself in. He's been suspended from the program for video voyeurism. Won't get into the details if you want them. Wilson wrote a story about it, LSU, or theadvocate.com/LSU. obviously, just from an on-field perspective, it could be a blow to LSU. We're talking about a team searching for its defensive identity, Reed, a guy who was at least going to be in the conversation to start at corner. Still could be. But as of right now, he's suspended from the roster.
Legal issues aside, just from a football perspective, cornerback is one of the positions, and we might get into this a little bit later. Cornerback is one of the positions where LSU has a ton of question marks. We don't know who's going to start. It could be a number of different guys, and he was going to be in the mix along with some of the other freshmen who sort of had to step into their roles last year because LSU was so depleted. They had so many injuries, especially towards the end of the season, and he was one of the guys who stepped in and played kind of well, kind of held up his own. But again, it was a lot to ask of a freshman, him and Ashton Stamps to be put in that position, especially late in the year. And so that sort of meant that he was one of the players who LSU could have counted on at some point in the season. Obviously, this changes things. Not going to speculate as to what exactly is how it's going to play out. But again, if we're a team that's trying to figure out how to fix itself defensively, it doesn't help at all.
Yeah, I mean, some other options include Jair Brown, who is the transfer from Ohio State. They're getting back J.K. Johnson from last season. He was another transfer from Ohio State, but from last offseason, but he was hurt all of last year. Zay Alexander's coming back from an injury. So they have a lot of options, and obviously you mentioned Ashton Stamps, and there's they have a lot of options, a lot of bodies. It's just they don't have a lot of reliable options. And Toviano was kind of in that camp of guys who, at least have some playing experience, but obviously the results weren't totally there because of what we saw from LSU's defense last season. So it's not great to lose a guy who was a pretty highly touted recruit who at least lose him in the interim, I should say, who was a highly touted recruit who could have definitely helped you out and could have, at least pushed competition within that mix, if not started for you this season.
I mean, two things. First of all, Koki, you mentioned it. We don't know what the suspension is going to be. He might miss a couple days of camp, and that's it. He might miss one game. He might be out for the season. We have no idea what LSU is going to do. We don't know how the legal troubles will work themselves out. We just don't know, okay? But it's not a great thing. Number two is this sort of thing happens when you've got, 80-some college athletes on a campus. You just, whether it's injury or suspension or what, you just can't expect everybody to be available at all times. And Reed, that's why you have depth. And LSU, you mentioned has to find somebody at corner. But at this point, like if this happens in week 2, it's sort of a footnote. We're just talking about it a lot because it's July, quite frankly.
When you think about where we kind of were last year at this time, we were expecting Zay Alexander and Deuce Chestnut, I think, to be the starters at outside corner. Yeah. One of those worked out. Zay Alexander had a solid year before he got hurt. But if you think about Deuce Chestnut and one of the other transfers that LSU brought in, Denver Harris, they didn't have either of those two guys for almost the entire season. So, it's a good thing. It's one thing to look at the roster on paper and see what you have right now. It can change. It could change quickly.
Yeah, because of those freshmen they had to play last season, now they actually weirdly have more depth, even though they still don't really have, SEC starters you're very comfortable with at those starting spots, unless, I guess, if Alexander is, we don't know how healthy he's going to be by the start of the season. So I think really outside of him, it's hard to be very confident in the other options just because, a lot of those guys are either hurt last year or a lot of those guys were young guys, having to go through a lot of growing pains. So it's a very interesting unit, and this is just another wrench that's been thrown into it, to say the least.
Yeah, and then as we gear up for camp, I mean, it's worth noting the way LSU schedules, there's no soft landing. They're not opening up with a Nickel State. No offense to Nickel State, but they're USC in Las Vegas is you better be ready to go because they're going to test you, especially in the secondary.
And LSU has not won an opener since 2019. Pretty crazy when you think about it. They haven't won the season opener since 2019.
So if they win the opener, national championship. That's what I'm hearing. No, not quite. But yeah, I mean, I get your point. You can't. You better have a good team right away to be able to win the types of openers that they schedule. So, going to switch gears for a minute as we're talking headlines. The other thing, as I mentioned, that happened last week, Koki, was the Major League Baseball draft, and for a top college baseball program like LSU's, you don't really know what you have for the next season until that draft is over, until you see who goes and who comes out, both among guys on your team and in your recruiting class.
Absolutely. I mean, this draft provided a lot of clarity for LSU, and it's a little bit different than last year because last year I think they had Luke Holman after the draft and maybe another piece or two. But this year, I'm pretty sure the roster is more or less set heading into the next year. I mean, they have 40 guys who. I wouldn't say they're scholarship guys, but they're guys who we pretty much know are going to be on the team at least to start the fall. And it's a very deep roster. They added a ton of transfers before the draft, so that cleared things up a little bit. Only lost one of them to the draft, in Luke Hayden. They added more pieces from their freshman class than I think a lot of people expected, including myself. You look at, we'll probably get to him, talk to him more in depth about him more in depth. William Schmidt and Kate Arambide, two guys who a lot of people thought when they first were committed to LSU would be off to Major League Baseball, but they're coming to campus. And they also have a ton of returning guys when it comes to positional players. I think they're going to have 6 starters from that Chapel Hill Regional back on next year's team, and I don't think people expected that many guys to be back. And the draft cleared up pretty much all of this. So it kind of tells you how important that 3-day period is in the middle of the summer.
And 2 years ago, LSU had Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz. Of course, that was one of the more talented teams in recent college baseball history. But I think it's safe to say that this year's roster looks, at least on paper, more talented than last year's. Maybe it's not at that 2022 level, or 2023 level, excuse me, but the 2025 team should have more talent than the 2014.
I think there's more stability offensively in the pitching staff. I don't know. It's tough to say because I think there was very high expectations of the pitching last year as well. And I think this year, I think a lot of it depends on your thoughts on the transfers because their pitching staff's made up of more or less transfers. They're really only returning 5 or 6 pitchers, and 2 of them were out for practically all of last season. So it's a lot of new faces in the staff, a lot of guys who haven't faced SEC hitting yet. And I think that's probably the biggest quote-unquote question mark with this team, even if the transfers that they brought in who are pitchers are pretty talented guys. Like Anthony Ianson played for Team USA. Devin Sheeran's up to 98 miles an hour in the fastball. I mean, they have a few guys who can get up there in the upper 90s with their fastballs. They don't have quite as much left-handed pitching depth as last season. So, I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on stuff like that. A lot of it's going to depend on how Chase Shores bounces back from his injury, but when we're talking about talent, he's probably the most talented guy they have on the staff. He's up to 100. He was in the starting rotation in 2023. So I think they're pretty deep and they have a lot of different options with the staff, even though I don't think it's quite as proven, I guess. But offensively, I think they're a lot more proven. Like I mentioned, like six returning starters, which is very different than last year when they had like 1.5, maybe 2 from that championship team. When you got those 6 guys and you bring a guy like Daniel Dickinson, who was a Team USA guy, and I don't know, I'm pretty optimistic. I'm a lot more optimistic about their offense heading into this year than I was last year. But a lot of it depends on how the pitching sort of translates to that SEC level, and it's going to be very interesting to see.
So speaking of the pitching and talented guys, on staff.
Yeah.
I think we really need to talk about William Schmidt and his commitment. Sort of surprised us, surprised everybody. We were driving to Dallas for SEC Media Days, and we had to pull over in a McDonald's when we got his announcement that he was coming to LSU because Koki had to jump on that. So I thought,
real quick aside, did you sit in the parking lot and hit the Wi-Fi, or did you actually go in and order something? Did you freeload? We need details.
No. We ordered stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, right. we went in.
You didn't get a meal, but Rab got like Scott Rabelais, our columnist. He got like what did he get?
The McFlurry? Did he like?
It wasn't a McFlurry. It was a chocolate something though, right?
Chocolate hot fudge sundae.
Maybe I got a coffee.
Rab's in France, so he's living the high life. But yeah.
I wonder what's hot chocolate in French. This is a crazy tangent.
Le chocolat chaud.
Le chocolat chaud. Yeah. I think
I'm just
something
guessing
like that.
But
We'll have to
anyway,
ask
I'm sorry to interrupt, but these are the details that people need to know.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So anyway, just Koki, if you could just articulate what exactly his decision to come to school and come to LSU. How significant is that, and what does it mean for LSU not only next year but 2-3 years beyond?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to look. I had to look back at the last 10, 20, 30 years of MLB draft rankings. But he is one of the highest. He's probably the highest rated recruit to ever come to LSU. And highest rated draft prospect ever to come to LSU. I mean, he was the #1 right-handed pitcher in MLB.com's draft rankings. I think people were shocked when Cam Johnson came to school last season. This guy is, I don't know, 20 spots higher on the draft prospects list than Cam Johnson even was a year ago.
Where was Dylan Cruz? Because he was a similar.
He was
situation.
a first-round guy. Yeah. Cruz was I think he was in the 20s or something like that. Part of that was because he didn't have a great senior year of high school because before COVID shut everything down. Because I think that was one of the bigger reasons why he came to school, was because COVID shut everything down. And he didn't have as much of a chance to sort of prove himself in that last year of high school. So
He didn't have much of a senior year.
Yeah. And William Schmidt had a whole senior year, you know, and everyone saw him throw 98 miles an hour with a big curveball and have a .44 ERA in a pretty good level of high school baseball in Louisiana, and him being from right down the road, I think helped a lot. And I think that and I think it's just absolutely huge that they have this guy who is pretty undisputably the most talented pitcher, freshman pitcher coming into the. That's going to come to college this year in the country. So it's huge news for them. And I don't think he's going to be a starter necessarily this year. They have a lot of different starting options. It's hard. It's really hard for freshmen to just sort of come into the starting rotation right away in the SEC. But I think next year and the year after that, he's going to be a huge piece of this team moving forward.
It's that LSU baseball mystique. He had a 0.44 ERA in high school in Louisiana. It's like, I got to go play for LSU. There's not a lot of schools that get that, but especially from a local kid, can see where the draw is to go play at the box and have 3 years in purple and gold. You're watching the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. I'm Zach Ewing with Koki Riley and Reed Darcy. Glad you could join us. Hit the like button if you like what you hear, and subscribe to the LSU Sports at the Advocate YouTube channel. I appreciate that. Trying to get to 4,000 before football season starts, before kickoff in Las Vegas. Get us to 4,000. So subscribe. Tell your friends about us if you like the content, and we'll keep rolling at least once a week. And once camp starts, I think we'll be going twice a week, back to our twice a week schedule. So back to football. You mentioned you guys were driving back from Media Days, and you did do a podcast from Media Days to kind of wrap up LSU's session. But just as a whole, SEC Media Days, any takeaways, any final thoughts that have percolated since then that you guys didn't get out, either about LSU or about the SEC as a whole?
The main thing that's sticking with me, I think, is just how difficult the SEC is going to be this year.
Yeah.
And just how competitive it's going to be, and just how difficult of a road some teams have to make it in the conversation of the college football playoff, even though it's expanded to 12 teams. That was my first time at Media Days, and the coaches and teams, they were just coming up one after the other, and like, ooh, that's a good team. That's a good team. That's a really good team. It's like, okay, the SEC was the best conference in the country last year. 6 teams finished in the top 12 of the final college football playoff rankings. Six SEC teams, if you're including Texas and Oklahoma, and it looks like it's going to be similar to that again this year. It was obviously difficult to look ahead, but I just think the overall strength of the conference, the competitiveness of it, and just looking at some of these teams' schedules, it's like, how are they going to be able to get to a 500 record, and what does that mean for them? So it's like, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be really fun to see some of these games. It's really fun to see exactly how things shake out and how teams sort of line up for the playoff, and what that changes about this season, what the playoff will change. So that's the main thing I took away from Media Days, is that the SEC is just as competitive as it's ever been, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely second that. Just in terms of like other potential takeaways, like I thought Mike Elko at Texas A&M. I wasn't there for the first 2 days of SEC Media Days because I was covering a lot of the stuff that was going on across the street in Arlington with the MLB All-Star Game. But for the last 2 days, I was there and got to hear the 8 coaches who spoke. And Mike Elko was by far the most impressive guy. He sounded like a coach who knew exactly how to develop a roster and embrace the transfer portal and embrace NIL and embrace all these new changes while also, creating a new culture. And I thought one of the things that really stood out to me when he was talking was about how he was proud about how quiet their offseason has been. And that really stood out to me because when you think of Texas A&M the last few years, their off seasons have been anything but quiet. Their seasons have been anything but quiet. It's been noise. It's been drama, whether it's something that Jimbo Fisher's cooking up or some beef he has with Nick Saban, or it's all the NIL noise, or it's off the field issues with some of their players. Now it really does feel like something has changed over in College Station, and I think that matchup between LSU and A&M and College Station, that's going to be a very big game, and I'm very fascinated to see how that game turns out.
Yeah, I don't know if A&M is good enough to win the SEC, but it feels like they're going to affect the race. They play enough good teams, they're going to knock somebody out of that race. But I agree with you. I mean, it's the total opposite of Jimbo Fisher. It was not a sexy hire. I think I said this when we were previewing SEC Media Days. The expectations are not high, and maybe that's what that program needs, because they've been so high and they've failed to meet them. I mean, we're talking 5-6 years in a row now that they could turn that around and kind of have the flip side. But to your point, Reed, look at a team like Oklahoma. Oklahoma probably has a top 15 roster in college football, maybe borderline top 10.
Yep.
That team could easily go 7-5. I think they'll be underdogs 5 times. They play at LSU. I think they have Alabama at home. They play Texas in the Cotton Bowl. They have Tennessee at home. They're at Missouri. All of these games, they could. I don't know their schedule in front of me, but by memory, just looking at it, I think they're going to be underdogs 5 times. It could be a 7-5 team. And on the flip side of that, re-listening to what Greg Sankey said in Monday's session with the commissioner, they don't have a tiebreaker set up yet for the SEC championship game. Right. So you're going to have a situation where, let's say Georgia goes 8-0 or Texas goes 8-0, and then you have, it's LSU, Ole Miss, and Missouri at 7-1 in the SEC. Who goes to Atlanta to face Georgia? What's the tiebreaker considering those teams don't play each other? Okay, and number 2, do you want to be the team that goes to play Georgia in Atlanta? I don't think you do, because if you're 11-1, you're going to be in the playoff. If you go to Atlanta and get beat by 2 touchdowns by Georgia, now all of a sudden you're on the playoff bubble. I mean, maybe you just say, just give me the 6th seed and I got a home playoff game and I'm happy. So I'm so excited for the season. I think it's going to be fast.
But on the other hand, if you go to the SEC championship and you beat Georgia, win the conference, then you're automatically into the playoffs.
And you probably have a bye.
Yeah.
And so there is something to be gained, but I'm not so sure that in that situation, whether it be Georgia or Texas or whoever's waiting for you in Atlanta, do you want to risk an injury, a loss, losing seeding, getting left out of the playoff entirely when you've got, let's say, the 6 or 7 seed in your back pocket and a home playoff game and a week off? That's going to be a tough choice. It's super interesting season. Media Days kicks it off. And as you guys said, August 1st is when LSU starts its preseason camp. So here's the question we pose to you, and we'll wrap things up with this. What's one question you want to see answered or you still have about LSU in this sort of interim period between Media Days and preseason camp?
Yeah. For me, I'm going to go a little bit outside the box, and I'm going to look at sort of the running back situation, because they don't really have a set number 1 running back heading into the season. I mean, they had Logan Diggs, and I think a lot of people expected that he would either go to the NFL or come back, and he decided to transfer to Ole Miss instead. So that sort of running back situation's pretty open, and I think that's there is at least more importance to that this season, because when you don't have a guy like Jaden Daniels, scrambling around, you're not running as many read options, and you're not having as many zone blocking schemes. But I think they're going to have a very different running game scheme, and I think they're going to have running backs are going to have to, I won't say learn that, but just run under very different circumstances when you don't have a quarterback who's going to potentially go off for 100 yards in a game, like they had with Jaden Daniels. That could happen any week. And I think Caleb Jackson has the explosiveness to be one of the better backs in the SEC. It's just a matter of can he how much has he learned in terms of pass protection and all the small mental things you need to know at the running back position in this day and age, especially. You have 2 veterans and John Emery and Josh Williams, obviously. And how do they mix into that fold? Because obviously they know what they're doing, doing, but they're not quite as talented. At least in my opinion, I mean, no offense to those two gentlemen, as talented as a guy like Caleb Jackson is, who's such an explosive runner. So how that running back room shakes out in terms of just like the depth chart and in terms of like which guy fits into the scheme and what the running game just looks like overall, I think is very interesting heading into this year.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, you got to have a running game. Last year, Jaden Daniels more or less was the running game. It was either zone read or it was him creating something out of a broken play. I think LSU, he had like 1,180 yards rushing, and the rest of the team combined had less than 1,500. And the top returner is Josh Williams at 284, 264, one of the two. Like, somebody's going to have to step up there. And somebody will. Somebody's going to get more than 280 yards.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of who it is and how effective they are.
And I think they have such a potentially dangerous passing game with probably the best situation you could possibly have in terms of having a new quarterback combined with the depth that they have at wide receiver and how good their offensive line is. Like, they're in an environment where those guys aren't going to be pressured too much. You know what I mean? It's not like they have to have the running. They don't have to build the ship out of the running game. It just needs to help out. It just needs to create enough balance to where teams aren't just like defending the pass and running nickel and dime on every single down.
Sure.
And we'll find out pretty quickly, I think, how ready Caleb Jackson is. We might find out, a few practices in the fall camp, because last season he showed flashes, and those flashes were unbelievable. You could see the potential that he has there, and you could see what exactly he's built for. But can he pass protect? Can he be a threat to catch passes? It's sort of, we're going to see exactly how much confidence the LSU staff has in him, I think, pretty quickly. And so we'll have that question answered.
And we should mention that Trey Holly has his legal situation as well that's going on. It looks like that could potentially get cleared up as we head towards regular season. And then there's also Caden Durham, who's the incoming freshman, a 4-star recruit. Given that they don't have the deepest running back room this season, I'm kind of curious to see what kind of run that he gets. Maybe he's kind of in the Caleb Jackson role from last season if he looks really, really good. So I'm sort of curious to see, like, just it's not just those three guys that I mentioned. There's a couple others who could make an impact as well.
All right, so Koki goes with the running backs. Read what you got.
All right, I'm going to go back to the corners. We touched on this a little bit more. Again, I just want to see who right now does LSU have penciled in as starters at the two outside corner spots. Because you could give me pretty much any two combination of guys, and I would believe you. I'd be like, that makes sense. Because there's just so many question marks. I think, once we get out there at practice, whenever the first practice is, we can see. We'll see who LSU is starting at those two outside spots, and that'll be our first hint into how the competition has shook out in the offseason. We don't know much about Zai Alexander's injury status. He got hurt towards the tail end of last year. We don't exactly know, what exactly he'll be ready for when camp starts. We're expecting J.K. Johnson, who transferred in from Ohio State, sat out all of last year with an injury. He could be in the fold, as well as, I'm going to miss his name, Jair Brown, another Ohio State guy who transferred in this offseason. It could be those three sort of jostling for two of the outside spots, but that's the main question that I want to see answered in fall camp. Just, who starts there, and who's going to be starting there against USC, because it's important. It's an important part of the defense, and their play is going to be an important part of any kind of turnaround that LSU might make this year on defense.
Yeah, I think the coaching staff last year was very impressed with Ashton Stamps' intellect and his ability to sort of pick up the defense very quickly, but at the same time, it seemed like there were times where he was physically overmatched, whether it was dealing with injuries or just being a slider-framed guy, because that was one of the things that Brian Kelly pointed towards as to him being maybe not the highest-rated recruit coming in as a former 3-star guy. So I'm kind of curious to see like how younger guys like him, or we just talked about Javian Toviano. He would have been definitely a contender for one of these spots as well. He still can be, obviously. So there's still a lot of question marks when it comes to that cornerbacks room, but they have a lot of options. It's just like, will there be two or three legitimate guys who emerge? And if that's the case, then that really changes the math with this defense.
Yep. I think the first thing I'm going to look for is when they break camp, this new defensive coaching staff. Adjustments are not always as easy to see on the defensive side as they are like talking about the Saints earlier today, Clint Kubiak's offensive scheme, very easy to see a difference between that and what the Saints ran before. Right. Defensive schemes is not always as easy to tell. But what I'm curious is where does Harold Perkins line up? And what does he look like? I mean, I think he's had sort of this already roller coaster career. People forget the guy's not even 20 years old yet. He turns 20 in September and can still be an absolute superstar in this league and be the linchpin of a defense. But they've got to put him in a place where he can succeed. So where does the new coaching staff try Harold Perkins?
The plan is to try to start at least back in the middle. That's the plan. That was the plan going into last season too.
Right.
So, and we saw how that worked out. But I think the plan is to have most of his snaps in the middle. He mentioned at media days, Brian Kelly mentioned at media days, that he's now around 225 pounds. It's about 10 to 15 pounds heavier than he was at this time last year. So that will help him take more of the punishment, that comes with playing in the middle. But I do think, you're not going to see him playing in one spot and have him locked into that one spot. I do think the defense and Blake Baker, they do want to move him around. They do want to sort of keep offenses on their toes to sort of see where exactly he's going to be lining up. He could be rushing the passer, on third downs. He could be dropping back into coverage at some points. He could be blitzing from the linebacker spots as well. So he's so versatile a player that you can sort of put him in different spots of the field and he can still excel. But again, the main thing that they need to figure out is, can we find something permanent for him? Can we find a more stable position for him that he can excel at and that can really help the defense? Because that's something that they never really quite figured out last year.
And the thing with playing Harold in the middle, it wasn't like he was bad in coverage. He was actually one of the better cover linebackers, maybe in the entire SEC last season.
He made an interception against Missouri.
Yeah.
Probably that was LSU's best win of the whole season. And that interception gave them that win.
Yeah, he's a good coverage linebacker. I don't think that's the issue. Having him back there against the pass, that's fine. It's the run fits, and the fact that he's not. And I think one of the main reasons why Brian Kelly talked about him adding on weight and him adding size is because so it's just not as easy. He doesn't get easily lost in the sauce when a guard comes pulling over and all of a sudden he's just mauled by someone who's just way bigger and way more intent on coming downhill. It's about improving his mental processing so he doesn't get caught up in those running actions, and also just improving his strength so it's not so he just doesn't get swallowed up as easily by some of these offensive linemen in the running game. I think the running fits is the issue. That's what it seems like to me, at least. I'm no coach on the coaching staff, but I think if they can clean that part up. In terms of like diagnosing those plays sooner and, obviously improving his body, which they're already doing that. I think that can go a long way improving him as a middle linebacker.
So we got running backs, cornerbacks, and then where does Harold Perkins line up and how does he look in his new body type and things like that? Things to keep an eye on as camp opens in a little more than a week. We will be back on the LSU Sports Insider podcast before that, put together a little full preseason camp preview for you next week at some point, and we'll be ready to roll at that time, guys. It's getting real now. The weather's still hot, but it will be football season pretty soon. So that's our show for today. Again, subscribe to the channel, like the video if you appreciate the content. Also, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We would love to hear from all of you and help us hit that 4,000 subscriber mark before the season starts. That's what we're aiming for. Maybe we'll get together a giveaway or something if we can get to 4,000 before the season starts. So for Reed Darcy, Koki Riley, Robert Young produced the show today. We appreciate him. I'm Zach Ewing, and we will see you next time on the LSU Sports Insider.